I want to start by asking you about the beginning of this book, if you don't mind. The book begins with Philip Bowman's experience as a naval officer, as a kind of prologue, there at the end of World War II. And it really, in the context of the whole novel, is our introduction to the man. And it's brief. By the beginning of chapter 2, he's in New York City. So I have two questions about that. The first is, why is that chapter important? What motivated your decision to enter the story there? And second, there's a related question. What has your 12 years in the Army Air Force meant to you, and how has it colored your life? And I think they're related in a way. The story of the character in his service and the story of the writer in his service.
The first part, why is it starting the war? Well, because that was a very significant part of his character, the experience. And secondly, because it felt right. I mean, this is a novel that flows along, that skips along, covers a long span. As I said, it covers about 40 years. And to do that, and to give some idea of society and the world in that time without writing 800 or 1,000 pages, I took a little liberty, or not the liberty, I decided to write it that. Now, the other part, it wasn't the Army Air Force, actually, the Air Force. They would be very upset. That was a long, long time ago. How did that color? You're not referring to this chapter, are you?
I'm referring to your life as a writer and your experience in those 12 years, and what your experience there did for you as a writer, and how it resonates in your writing.
Well, I don't know if I really understand myself what that did for me. I mean, you meet people you would not meet in literary circles, and it was broadening for me. I was a city boy. I had only been in school, and then into the Air Force. So it was my entry into life.
And when you were at West Point, you wrote a few stories at West Point that were published in the West Point publication there. And then in the early years, at least of your service, you stopped writing. Why was that, and what made you return to writing?
And that's not exactly so. I was right.
Is it close? It's okay.
No, it's very close. But I had no place, and they were not, whatever I wrote was not going to be published. There was no school magazine to publish in, so I wasn't writing stories. They were rather inept in any case. So I was writing, I did have a try at writing a novel. I had time enough, to do that, but it was not a good piece of work. And it was only later on, 5 years in, 6 years in, that I guess, I don't remember what made me decide, try again. I take that back, I do remember what made me decide. Experience fighting in Korea, my own experience, gave me material that I thought I would like to write about. So that's when I really began in earnest again.
And why did you decide to write under a pseudonym?
Well, I've explained this many times. I wrote it under a pseudonym because I was a career officer, a professional officer. I had already been in the service for, what year is this? We're talking about 1956 or 7, for already 10 years. And I hadn't decided to resign my commission. And if I was going to publish a book, I didn't want to publish it under my own name. That's not a particular, that would not be an asset in those circles. In addition to which, I thought it was quite a good book, and I wanted it to be admired, but I didn't particularly want it to be known that I had written it. I'd have been perfectly satisfied if that had never come out, but that's not the way it happened.
In the epigraph to this book, you actually, it's a quote from an essay you wrote, Some for Glory, Some for Praise. For those of you who don't know the epigraph, there comes a time when you realize that everything is a dream and only those things in writing have any possibility of being real. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose that as the epigraph?
Well, it's appropriate. I wrote it. And for all I know, I may have written it expressly for this book. But in any case, at a point in life where your memory is both becoming a little weaker and is as rich as it's ever going to be in experiences, that is, there is a dreamlike quality to things. You realize that everything is past. I don't want to sound morbid. This probably sounds like the end of things. It's close to the end, but not quite. And you realize that when friends die, when you watch your contemporaries vanish, you realize you're taking, this is an ordinary, a commonplace thought, but it becomes more powerful to you. They're taking a world with them. They're taking their world with them. And it is vanishing completely. The same thing is going to happen to your own world, except those things that are written down. This is, I mean, it is quite simple. And I believe that, who was the Spanish playwright? Life is a Dream, I believe. Yes, I had that in mind.
You know, among, I don't say this, but among the things that the novel and all your work, for example, has made really very real for readers is that kind of mystery of the sexual connection in a way that's completely, really unsentimental, but also in a way deeply romantic. And in the 40 years that this novel covers of Philip Bowman's life, the markers of his life are the women he's loved. It's such a clear through line in the novel. And can you talk a little bit about the power of that connection and how it motivates you as a writer and what it means?
Well, it motivated him, I mean, the power of it. Well, it's the women, as they say. And that's all I mean, I don't know what, it's not really the only thing in the book, by any means. There's this relationship, there's a parallel story with Ed's.
Yes.
And of course, Ed's story is also a romantic one. But it seemed self-evident that these were crucial things in life, so I merely approached them directly.
The reason I say the primacy of the sexual connection is because he's not, in a way, you don't feel that Philip Bowman is marking his life by career milestones or by things like that. You really feel somehow in the book that he's marking it by a few things. His experience in World War II, the women he loves, the disastrous marriage and the other women he loves, and then his notion of friendship. And those three things are sort of in this book more than in your other books, the balance of the three.
Well, I feel I'm defending these choices, which I really don't need to do. This is the way the book is written, I mean, if you don't like it, I quite understand. So,
I do like it.
no, if one doesn't like it. So that's the approach it takes. This is not the only such book.
This book has an interesting structure, but it's also present in your earlier work too. Exploring the Pastime is such an innovative book in its structure. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how, as a writer, you make the decisions about how you're going to structure a book. I know is it a mysterious process for you, or do you work right from the get-go with the problems of structure?
Well, I guess you have an idea before you begin, but you find out whether the idea is a good one or not, whether it's going to work or not. This book, all it is, has a riverine structure. I mean, it follows along through the course of much of the life, has certain estuaries, certain inflows, and that seemed, I think I had that idea from the beginning, I would say, because when I was making notes for it, outlines, and outlining chapters, that's the form it took right from the start. I don't know how conscious these decisions are. I suppose in one sense, quite conscious, in another, they're determined by what your instincts are, which is not completely conscious.
You're so known for the beauty of your sentences. At an event earlier this year, someone asked Don DeLillo, said, "You write your books sentence by sentence, it seems." And he said, "Well, actually, I write them letter by letter." And I was wondering, when you are in the writing process, are you working your sentences sentence by sentence in a draft? Or do you write and then go back? Do you just write fluidly and then go back?
That's a beautiful image, really. Just sitting down and saying, I'll write a page today.
Does it work like that?
Well, not really. I do my best to write the whole thing out, one way or another, and then go back and put it in a form that I'm not too dissatisfied with to keep. I don't agonize over a sentence in the first draft, or even sometimes in subsequent drafts. The thing to do, in my case, is to try and get it down.
I was wondering, you spent a number of years in Hollywood, and recently, preparing for this, I watched Downhill Racer again, which is a wonderful movie and a very salter piece of art. Your voice is so present in that. Anyone who reads your books and then looks at Downhill Racers, it's so obvious. Can you tell me about that experience of writing for film, and for that movie in particular, and what was the attraction of it, and then ultimately why you left it?
Well, the attraction in the beginning was an offer, was money. They said, I don't want to veer off into films here, but Polanski was trying to make this film, and his producer came to me, and I met him through this, came to me and said, what would you think about writing a film for Roman? That's the way it started. Later, they vanished from the film. This happens from time to time, and Redford took it over. I was already involved with it, and so I stayed with it with him, and that's essentially the story of it. we did, he's notorious for his hesitation about things, whether to do it or not do it, for never arriving on time, which I know quite well. And we followed the ski team in the Olympics. We went to the Olympics for 2 weeks and hung around with them. And I had a notion, this is rather typical, I think, of my ideas. I had a notion that Billy Kidd, a New England racer who was laconic, somewhat unfriendly in manner, but the best skier on the team, was the one we should kind of model our hero after. Redford didn't like that. He picked out a blonde Californian with an outgoing personality whose name was, who was most famous at the time, or I mean, broken his leg 5 times, and said, he's the one. So anyway, that's all there is to that film.
We won't talk about film anymore. I have a question for you about another part of your life that seems very important for you. I don't think I've ever read a better evocation of the French landscape than in your book. Proust, maybe? But it's so beautiful, not only of the landscape, but of the little villages, of the train rides, sort of pastime. And can you talk a little bit about your, what seems to be your profound affection for the country and how it's influenced you or made you the kind of writer you are? Has it had that kind of influence?
Well, I had a predisposition to love France, only from books as a schoolboy. And I went there for the first time, I was 25 years old. It was in the middle of winter, and it's 5 years after the war. Paris was in miserable shape. It was sooty, it seemed to have lost its spirit. The Champs-Élysées, you could walk across with your eyes closed without danger of being hit by a car. And but the grandeur of it simply got me. I was made to like Paris. And then I went there subsequently, maybe 4 years later. And then over the years, quite a number of times. And I've lived in France periodically, once for a couple of years, not in Paris, out in the country. And I mean, you write what you desire, what you really, what means something to you, and France meant that to me. Now, why that is, I mean, you just have to take my word for it, that I responded to it.
At this point in your career, are there things that you're doing on the page as you're writing that you feel are quite different because of the point you are at in your life, or are there things you're attempting now that you wouldn't have attempted earlier?
No.
I have another question. This is an easy one, I think. I hope it is. Who's your? I want to know who your ideal reader is and what kind of impact or effect you imagine in the ideal reader. And then I think also I'd like to know, on the other side of that, what are a couple perfect novels you've read that have impacted you so much as a reader?
Oh, well, you read a lot of mine. That'd be a long list. There are a lot of novels that you would give anything in the world to have written. It's quite impossible that you could write any of them. They're also definitely and defiantly someone else's. But the first you first asked me
Do you have an ideal reader?
Oh yes, the ideal reader. Well, the ideal reader is somebody who says, I loved your book. and then is able to quote a line from it that you feel takes some discrimination to appreciate. There he or she is. And that's all there is to the reader. The other thing was all books. Well, I don't know. I admired Richard Ford the other night. This was at the Y, the 92nd Street Y. I was there with him, and he was describing what he thought great American novels were. And he said, the first qualification is they are short. And I like short novels myself, perhaps not as much as he does. I mean, well, you name a couple of ones. I like The Leopard. I like the whole story about the leopard. I like Lampedusa's never having written another book, writing it and publishing it. It was published posthumously. His wife appeared to be very uninterested in literature, more in smoking and clothes and such things. He was an aristocrat. They lived in Palermo. I mean, that's everything in the world right there. And of course, he wrote simply a book that is unbelievable. On the other hand, I mean, stimulated by my wife and other people praising it, I started reading who did the latest Proust?
Lydia Davis.
Lydia Davis, yes. I started reading that, and I thought, well, I've got to read all this. I mean, it's just sensational. They asked me, we're going to England because there's a British publication of All That Is on May 23rd, and we were going over to assist in the promotion of it. And part of it, there are a lot of people you have to talk to and meet, and one of them, oddly enough, that the publicity person in particular said she was just going to pop into the schedule, is I am to read an American story on whatever it is, BBC or something, story of my choice. And they provided a list of the stories that had been read previously, and that of course I was not to, duplicate. Well, all the stories were by Raymond Converts. So I picked a Lydia Davis story. She's a considerable writer, and this particular story of hers, Breaking It Down is the title of the story. It is all a monologue, about a 9-page monologue, and it's simply incredible, incredibly moving, and I hope I can read it. I mean, I'm up to it. I don't want to break down and cry in the middle of it.
So having read All That Is and having met you now, I'm sure there's more to come, and I'm a little curious about whether you're writing anything now or whether you're working on a next book.
No.
Not yet. Okay, soon though.
What, soon?
Soon. Maybe.
Yes.
We're going to open it to the audience for about 4 questions, exactly four questions. And so if you have a question, please raise your hand. And we have someone. Yes, back there.
When you the novel we're speaking about now, I'm just curious, When you began the first chapter and you knew it was going to go 40 years, did you know at the first chapter where he was going to be in the last chapter, or does that evolve for you?
Can you hear the question in
Yeah.
back? Yes?
I can repeat it
No,
before
no,
you
I
go back.
can hear the question. Anyway,
Did you hear it in the back?
well, in any case, the question briefly is, when you decided on, when you wrote the first chapter, did you have any idea what the last chapter and what the course of the book would be? That's essentially right, yes. Yes, I did. On a piece of paper, I drew a line and I marked it off in the years, and then I began filling in by the way you put speech in a cartoon character's mouth with balloons, little notes for the years, and then, but that wasn't quite it. Then I made a big, what can I say? Well, it was a cork board actually, and on it I pinned 36 chapters. I don't know why it was 36. I guess, I don't know. That was all the space on the board. And under each of those pins I began gathering material for that chapter and what would be in it. But I had a good idea what all of them were. They changed a bit individually during the course of writing them. Some were replaced by other better ideas, different ideas, but essentially I knew where I was going. I didn't have the last line, which is something John Irving always has before he begins a book. And he says it's very simple, you just write to it. And there is, you have the book.
Yes.
I really enjoyed your book of letters with Robert Phelps, and I know that you're well known for your correspondences. I was wondering if you have any plans to publish any more of your letters with writers and friends.
The question for those of you in the back was if he has any plans to publish any more of his letters with friends.
I don't want to seem too immodest, but a lot of my letters tend to have anecdotes, travel notes, chat, irrelevancies, and such in them. I haven't read them. I mean, they're not in my hands. Of course, they were sent to people. Almost all of them sold them to the Harry Ransom Institute. So I don't know what a lot of them are, but the ones I've seen, I don't know if they would be that interesting. And there are a lot of letters. It would take, I can't answer whether I think it's worthwhile or not without first going back. Of course, the letters depend entirely on the recipient. That is to say, who you're writing to generally determines the tone of the letter. Your intimacy and your relative strength, so to speak. I don't know how to explain that. So some letters are interesting, some, and I mean they may be voluminous, maybe not that interesting. Lastly, I don't know what the audience is for a book of letters. People who like to read books of letters, I have a feeling are not too plentiful.
Question? Yes.
Yes. In reading your books, there's so much wisdom and worldliness in it. And it seems evident that the author is led in what I would call an intrepid life. You know, I'm in an MFA program, and I'm considered kind of the old man because I'm in my 30s and have lived some before I started writing. But my question is, how important do you think it is to live a full life and have that become a part of your writing? Because a lot of the students in my MFA program become inured in the microcosm of academia for the rest of their lives. Do you think that's kind of a dangerous thing?
Well, I I don't think you should believe too firmly in that, or your book is going to be as delayed as mine is. I don't think that's important. I mean, there is such a thing as youthful wisdom. That can be very, very moving, very powerful, and completely authentic. What we're calling wisdom here, for want of a better word, it's a rather homely word, I think is, you have it all along. It's just a question of whether it's accessible to you or not, whether you are able to access it, and whether there's and whether you can express it unmediated and in the right form. Nobody likes to. I have a problem. I sometimes write aphorisms in the book, or what seem to be aphorisms. I'm scrupulously trying to eliminate all those, but sometimes you don't recognize one, or you think it'll get by. But, I think wisdom that exists outside the pages is a separate quality I'm a little suspicious of. The book is the book. It has everything in it. It's like, right. It's like the woman in here. That's it.
We have time for one more question, but before we take that question, I want to let you know that Jim will be signing books afterward, but he will only be signing this book. So if you have other books of his, they're not going to be signed. So please, if you do the signing, please only bring this book up, okay? And so we have time for just one more question. No more questions? Here we go.
Well, it's not about the books, but it's about your film you did called Free. I thought it was a very interesting movie with Sam Waterstone and Charles Rampling. I wanted to know if you would care to talk about that film and why it's never been released on video or DVD.
I didn't hear it.
I heard most of it.
You did?
The question is about the film Free,
Yeah.
Sorry.
and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Why it wasn't
And did you have an
It never
explicit?
came out. It never was commercially put on a video DVD from
Couldn't quite
He
understand.
said it never came out, it was never commercially
Oh
put
yeah,
out?
yes, it was released to
As a DVD?
a DVD. No, I don't believe there's a DVD of it. There is a bootleg videotape. if you have an ancient machine.
That's how the commercially came out.
And it has been, somebody told me it was on television the other day. And the question is why? You want to know why? No. You know the answer. It's not that interesting. I mean, it's earnest, it's nice looking. It has Sam Waterston and Charlotte Rampling in it. And there's some nice music. It didn't turn out.
Well, I like the film anyhow.
Anyway, thank you so much.